Welcome to War and Battleground. It's Thursday, 30 June, the year of our Lord 2022. It's our last show in the first half of 2022. Man, has it flown by. Just absolutely incredible. We've got a lot to get to. I've got Ben Harnwell, head of our international bureau. He is headquartered in Rome. We set the stage. Battleground is about the intense and the all-important 2022 midterm, and at every level, from the school boards to the elections boards, canvassing boards, your community, your county supervisors, local DAs, mayors, state legislatures, vitally important state legislatures, then to the House seats, because we're taking back the House, and obviously the Senate, governorships, all of it. But there's things underpinning this. There's these forces in the world, the kind of convergence of forces, and I call it the convergence of crises. Steve Cortez, we've worked through this theory called the created crisis of the illegitimate Biden regime, and it is coming to the United States full force. Remember, elections have consequences. Stolen elections have catastrophic consequences. And we're hearing, we're seeing the results of those catastrophic consequences, or those catastrophic consequences, every day in every element of American life. When Trump ran against Clinton in 2016, one of the themes I had worked on at Breitbart and brought into the campaign was about the managed decline of our nation by our elites, the uniparty, both sides of the aisle, that America had been in managed decline for essentially many, many decades, but particularly in the 21st century, and that Trump was a voice to reverse that Trump's populist nationalist policies, America first, not America alone, but America first, would be what we needed to do to center ourselves to then start to turn the country around. What we've seen since the stolen election of 2020, let's be honest, is not a managed decline. This is now what I call the collapse of a complex system. And we're seeing it everywhere. One of the big issues over the weekend is now there's, once again, thousands of flights canceled. Why are the thousands of flights canceled? Well, they're telling you, hey, it's the FAA, it's the supply chain, it's fuel cost, it's the weather. We got too many thunderstorms, it's all nonsense. Part of it, a big part of it, is obviously the vax mandate for pilots. Dr. Malone was on this morning to talk about that, and it's caused complete havoc and chaos. We're seeing the collapse of a complex system across the board, whether it's empty baby shelves with no formula, families buying quarts and not half gallons of milk at Walmart. As the Walmart CEO says, hey, they can tell there's a recession on. But really today, and we talked about in the previous hour, there's modeling out today. Tomorrow's going to be announced the results of the first half of the year, but particularly the second quarter GDP. And there's a modeling out already that says it looks like it's going to be at a minimum negative 1%. There was kind of government forecast to be 0.2%, which would be dead flat. And of course, what they're going back and doing is they're readdressing or recalibrating the modeling 30 days afterwards. So the first quarter turns out it was worse than originally projected as they, quote unquote, more refine the numbers. The numbers are always ratcheted down. The middle class and the working class, they understand, very bluntly, we're in a recession. Steve Cortez did the math the other day that if you look at you look at utilities and gas and fuel and food, inflation could be at 20-25% for those basic necessities. You throw rent in there because rents are starting to explode right now. You're going to be up in the 25 to 30. That's the type of price increases you've had. You've had very small wage increases, anywhere from around 3%. So you got negative huge amount, anywhere from, 7, 10, 15% as far as real wages goes. And people are feeling it right now. You can see they're making choices. But you go to the airlines, you go to just anything in America, the southern border, our education system, everything is in collapse. And that's why people are on edge, and people are, they're getting angry, right? And that anger is coming out in polling to the Biden administration. The Biden administration, historic, unprecedented, unheard of lows. When I took over the campaign of President Trump in August 16, one of the things I first told him, I said, look, there's some basic, forget the poll numbers that you see that they say you're on August 13th. You're down 8, 10, 12, 14 points, depending on who the poll was, right? Because of this situation he had with the Muslim family, the Gold Star parents that spoke at the convention. He got in this tussle with them, and his poll numbers started to drop precipitously. And quite frankly, the campaign was spinning out of control. That's why I stepped in there. I said, hey, the polling that Pat Caddell's done on the side, but the right track, wrong track. And that's a key indicator of mood of the nation and mood of the nation for political change. It had been at 2/3, 1/3 negative at the end of the Bush administration. They were tired of the Iraq war. They were tired of the Afghan war. They were tired of, and they could feel the financial collapse coming that came right before Election Day in September of 2008 and then rolled through election. The country was on the wrong track, and a great majority of people felt that, 2/3, 1/3, right? So, at the end of the Obama administration, Obama, because of what he did to get us out of the financial crisis, what he did at the Federal Reserve, what he did to prop up Wall Street, what he did to prop up real estate prices, and really do have the most massive, to that time, concentration of wealth in American history. Once again, in the spring and summer of 2016, guess what? The right track, wrong track was 2/3, 1/3. Dave Bossie and myself, our producer Dan Float, we spent an entire year with Pat Caddell doing a film about independents and Democrats that voted for Obama that would not vote for him again. And what was the theme? He was supposed to be an agent of change, and he hadn't changed anything. In fact, he made stuff worse. He'd exacerbated. Right track, wrong track, 2/3, wrong track, 1/3. And of course, Donald Trump won with this kind of spectacular come from behind victory. What do we have today? The polling out in the last 24 hours. 85% of the American people don't think that, it's a poll, 85% of the American people don't think the country's on the right track. 85% is unprecedented. I mean, it's stunning. And at the White House all day long, you cut on cable news and they're talking about, no, there's a misinterpretation when Kamala Harris says Biden's definitely running, and he's already telling donors, he's already telling people that how he matches up against other people in his administration, like Pete Buttigieg, how he matches up against Amy Klobuchar and Pocahontas there in the Senate, how he matches up with Governor Whitmer, Governor Newsom, Governor Pritzker in Illinois, how he matches up with all these theoretical matchups. It's all nonsense. It's the 85% negative approval rating of the proxy, which is the independent voters, the proxy of the American people on the economy. Biden doing a good job. Approval of 20% among independents, almost into the teens. These are unprecedented numbers, and they're coming through. This is why you have 1 million new Republicans that have signed up. They've either been independents or Democrats before. They've switched over to the Republican Party. This is why you have these massive turnouts in these Republican primaries. This is why the urgency to vote is up. I think it's 27% with the Republican. It's -2%. It's -2% with the Democrats. So the intensity to vote. And Roe v. Wade's not going to change it. The basic economics is so bad that people want a dramatic change. Well, underneath that is, how did this get here? And what's actually going on? One of the things we pride ourselves in the War Room is to try to give you that intellectual framework, to try to give you that frame of reference so that then new information comes and you have what we call a mental map. One of the things we talked about a lot is when we first started pandemic was, you're going to have this pandemic that will lead to a drop in aggregate demand and a promise of supply chain. So you're going to have a drop in aggregate demand that will lead to an economic crisis. That economic crisis will then lead to a financial crisis. That financial crisis will then lead to a capital markets crisis, which will lead to political crisis and then geopolitical. And the convergence of all that, right, whether it's in the bond market or whether it's in the drug market or whether it's in a kinetic situation in the South China Sea, the convergence of those will start to overwhelm political systems and particularly overwhelm political leaders who are not ready for it, particularly a group and leaders right now, we had a slight technical problem right there. Leaders are being overwhelmed. You see, this is the problem with the Biden administration. The Biden administration the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. You got Pete Buttigieg wandering around out to the port of San Pedro in Los Angeles. He's holding these press conferences and talking about, we did a McKinsey study. McKinsey said it'll take us 2 years. They're not on top of things. They don't work with a sense of urgency. So that's why people are sitting there, even independents and Democrats, saying, these crises are converging, and I can see with my own eyes it's starting to overwhelm. So what we've done is we're trying to make sure that you do have this framework. You have this frame of reference. And one of the things that Ben's been working with us is going around and talking to some of the smartest people in capital markets, smartest people in things like vaccines and pandemics, smartest people in national security. In fact, over this weekend on Saturday, as part of our commemoration for the 4th of July, what we're doing is we're combining, July 2nd is the day of actually the Declaration of Independence approved. We're going to combine the commemoration on the Declaration of Independence and the war that we had to fight to win our freedom, combine it with what's happening in the world stage today. And we got Frank Gaffney and Eric Prince, some real Steve Mosher, Brian Kennedy, are joining us to really go through that. And on Monday, we're going to continue that with Dave Bratt of the intellectual underpinnings of the Constitution, the philosophical underpinnings. One of the things I wanted to do was to reach out and make sure we talk to the smartest people in the world. And we're very honored, and Ben was critical in this, to talk to Archbishop Vigano. Now, for our non-Catholic audience that doesn't know him, this is one of the smartest thinkers in the world. Now he's a man deep in church tradition and, has studied at the greatest universities in the world. But in his practical job as a priest, he has been in the diplomatic corps, or the ambassador corps of the Vatican, which is probably one of the most, I would say, squared away in the world. And he was essentially called papal nuncio. He was the ambassador of the papacy here in the United States, essentially ambassador of Rome to the United States of America, and here did a legendary job, and is a revered figure as a Catholic intellect about Catholic theology and particularly current issues with the Catholic Church. But more importantly, for a non-Catholic audience, this is one of the smartest geopolitical thinkers of our time, and we were fortunate enough, and Ben, you were instrumental in this, to be able to do an interview for him that we've put up exclusively this morning on warroom.org, and it's already gone viral. I mean, I've gotten so many compliments, and so many, not just compliments, people that didn't know Archbishop Vigano go like, who is this guy? So Ben, walk us through give us your overall take on the interview, the questions, and some of the things that jumped out at you with this amazing interview with an amazing guy.
Good afternoon, Steve. Yeah, he is an amazing guy. For an 81-year-old, you can see that his thinking is razor sharp. And you mentioned that he's a career diplomat just now, and he finished his service as the Pope's ambassador to the United States, which is a very important appointment for the Vatican. But one of the things that he isn't is a politician. He's a cleric. He's a churchman. And yet, as I go through the 10 pages now of his interview with the War Room, there is an astonishing degree of not only of intellectual synthesis and rigor applied to contemporary problems, but there is an ability here which is really unparalleled even in the world of politics, of being able to synthesize from these data points a narrative in such a clear way that it can't help but bring people on board. So I'm just going to start off now, and I'm going to go through this, Steve.
Let me give one technical thing. We've got it up on the site. We're pushing it out everywhere, and the comments I had, Ben, when people read it today, is that this is the most based thinking I've seen. This is probably the purest distillation of MAGA, ultra MAGA, that I've seen out there from a what I would call a public intellectual. So with that, so everybody out there say, hey, this writing is not, although it's steeped in church tradition and steeped in Christianity and steeped in his life that he's dedicated to the church and to Jesus Christ and to the promulgation of Christianity. This is the thinking of really not a secular thinking, but it's looking at the world as MAGA would look at the world. And everybody dismisses, Ben, I know they do in the capitals of Europe. They look down their nose, first off, the United States intellectually overall, but they really look down at the deplorables of MAGA and America First. They think we're essentially it's the breathe through their mouth followers of Trump. Nothing. This is, when you read this is not intellectual slumming. This is an intellect of a very high order applied to a problem in the world that he sees as a diplomat. Ben Harnwell.
That's absolutely right, Steve. Well, if Denver would like to put up my first selection now, my first quote. Brilliant. Here it is. This is, I think, this is the start off, okay, and I'm going to distill as I go through this what the principles are, the general principles that Archbishop Vigano is elucidating for us. So the first point here is that our overlords are lying to us for money and power. That is his first principle. Now, further down in the text, I've got three principle, Steve, quotes which will be on the screen. If folks want to go back and listen to the show that we did earlier, where we went into the first two, and then I'll break down the analysis onto the third one. But here's the text that I'm going to quote. Certainly, the Archbishop says, those who wanted to manage the pandemic in this way are not disposed now to yield easily, also because there are billionaire interests behind all of it. Now, that is the companion piece to the quote that was just on the screen. There's no point in reading it because it's quite long. As I say, this is Archbishop Vigano's introduction to his interview, making the point that our overlords are lying to us for money and power. He then goes on to say, Steve, that these lies are being coordinated at the global level, and he cites two players that are involved in coordinating these lies: the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization. And this is further down on the interview. He says that the response to the pandemic was the same all over the world. And he goes on in an analysis critiquing the self-proclaimed experts and how they manipulated the pandemic to maximize their power. And the end of one of his segments, and I'll close on this point with this extract, is that there is clearly a single script under a single direction. This demonstrates the existence of a criminal design and the malice of its creators. So here we see the outstanding analytical grasp of the issues, and then the extremely communicative elements and essence of what he is trying to communicate to his followers. Now, he also says...
hang on. I want to stay there just for a second to make sure the audience... Because you've seen a lot of bloggers, guys throwing out a lot of stuff. Here, he ties together the pandemic response, and he takes it in two ways. One was the response itself to the pandemic. The other was the economic response. And that's why he ties together the World Health Forum, basically the party at Davos, Klaus Schwab, with the World Health Organization, and what the Tony Fauci run doing throughout the world as a means of control. And he ties back to, says, look, they were doing this pandemic in kind of this single design, but at the time they were also thinking of Build Back Better and what they called the Great Reset, that they saw the ability to take really the liberal democracies of the Judeo-Christian West and to be able to really graft on to have this autocratic administrative state that would take charge. And that autocratic administrative state would be the Tony Fauci's of the world, all the way up to Tedros, right? On the public health emergency side. And then the whole World Economic Forum, party at Davos, guys that are in the different governments that think that the administrative state is the way to go, an autocratic state, impervious to the people's desires or the people's focus of where they want their country to go. Ben Harnwell.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. All I can do here, Steve, is I've got about 10 takes from this text as highlights to try and illustrate what the narrative is. What people absolutely have to do is go on to the at War Room Getter account, get hold of the original thing and read it, and then flesh out the data points that we're identifying here now. Because to go through it line by line, we'd be here for 3 or 4 hours. So all I can do is just pick up the skeleton of the narrative, try and bring that to the forefront, and then when people go back and study the text, what you're adding to here, I think it will jump out more readily when people read the text themselves. Now, the next point I would like to mention is the fact. Now, I'm using the word overlords here throughout this text because I think that best describes and that's my favorite word to describe the people who are ruling over us. That's not an Archbishop Vigano word, however, but the rest of it is pure Vigano. Okay, so the next point I'm going to do now is that having mentioned that we're being lied to for money and power by our overlords, and having mentioned that these lies are being coordinated at the global level by, for example, the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization. The next point that the Archbishop says is that the point that he makes is that our overlords are wielding power unlawfully and anti-democratically. And the text I'm going to in his interview is this. He says, a silent coup is a coup d'etat that takes place without the use of force, carried out by a government that exercises power in an unconstitutional way. And then he goes into this really in the Italian context, of which he is expert, as well as the American context. But he backs that up with examples from specifically really from Italy. And then further down,
but hang on 1 second. I don't know if you're going to get to it, but I want to say in that silent coup, he is definitely part of the 3 November movement. I mean, I think he states, I saw in there that the election was stolen from Trump. They had to get Trump out of office. They had to move on Trump. So this is part of that. He does, I think, Draghi and obviously the details of Italy, which anybody knows Italian politics and EU politics. It's a brilliant assessment. It's one I've argued for years. I've gone to give speeches, right? The Italian people have been dialed out of any, they keep dropping technocrats in there from the EU and throw the Italians a little money to accept that. His analysis of that's brilliant. But for the American audience, he's 100% with us on 3 November. Is he not, Ben Harnwell?
100%. That's. I'm going to come to that just a little bit towards the end as part of the conclusion of as I tie it all together. But yes, he absolutely does. I mean, as a former ambassador to the United States, he is 100% on the U.S. political situation. Just as exactly as you'd expect a well-informed ambassador to be. So my next point then is that. Is the Archbishop Vigano's illustration, where he says that he indicates that our overlords maintain their power through regulatory capture backed up by corruption. And here's the specific part in the text that puts this data point in on the graph. Just like the drug agencies and health organizations are composed of former big pharma employees who often receive consulting contracts and who are paid by the very pharmaceutical companies they are supposed to be keeping an eye on. So this is all part, each time as I'm drawing out one of these elements in the text, Steve, it's all part of it, of a straight line, a linear line in Archbishop Vigano's thinking. And as you mentioned before, his analysis on the power grab behind the COVID pandemic, he also, and I'll come on to this, he also then basically says that is simply an iteration of which another example is Ukraine. But we'll get to that in due course, because still on the pandemic, Archbishop Vigano goes on to say, up until the pandemic, power was, in practice, still managed, at least formally, by individual nations, and laws were passed by parliaments. But for the last 2 years, the parliaments have been deprived of authority, and all those whom the World Economic Forum and other lobbies have succeeded in placing at the high levels of governments and international institutions have begun to legislate against the Constitution and the interests of the nation. So this is the continuing part of his thinking. And at this part, the Archbishop illustrates that our overlords used the pandemic to displace democratic accountability and impose their own control. So you can see point by point how the Archbishop is taking forward his thinking here to take everybody with him. Now, there is a sign on your mantelpiece, not in it's more for the morning show, with the famous expression. Excuse me, that's the wrong part. This next point is Archbishop Vigano's indication that what he's talking about now is not a conspiracy, but it's in your face. And here he says, to think that there is no relationship between the instigators of these crimes and those who carry them out at the highest levels of national governments, the EU and the UN, is a sign of bad faith, because even a child could understand that we are being held hostage by a group of technocrats who are ideologically deviant and morally corrupt. The peoples of the world need to reclaim their sovereignty, which has been usurped by the globalist elite. Ben,
hang on. Ben, hang on 1 second. We're gonna take a break. That is such a powerful. You timed that perfectly, Ben Harnwell. Not bad. That is, to me, it is, if not the most powerful, one of the most powerful quotes from this incredible interview. All Harnwell and I did was come up with the questions. The Archbishop went yard, as we say. Short commercial break. Ben Harnwell from Rome, Stephen K. Bannon from here in Washington, D.C. We're going through the interview we just had with Archbishop Vigano about the World Economic Forum in the world today. Be back in a moment.
War Room Battleground with Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, welcome back. We have Ben Harnwell in Rome. We're talking about Archbishop Vigano, this interview we did. Ben, here's the question I've got. It's just so people understand. We're going to continue to go through it. You've got your punch list, but this is one of the most, particularly, and I would say the secular side of the church, or the church that's the world facing. In that regard, he's a man of the church, but also the man of the world. People will tell you when he's papal nuncio here, which is essentially ambassador of Rome to the United States. He's an incredibly sophisticated guy, had a real feel for American people, culture, society, politics, and studied a lot. I studied even more of it while he was here to get ingrained in it. His reputation has always been somebody that's, I think, been a little bit of a firebrand when it comes to church teaching, and particularly he and the Pope have had a ongoing battle about kind of the direction of the church. Obviously, Archbishop Vigano has been a traditionalist or a conservative Catholic, but I just want to make sure, particularly for our non-Catholic audience, the Catholic audience will get it. The status he has in the church as a thinker, as a man of not just the world, but somebody understands how the world works, but also understands the framework of how the world works and the direction that the world heads. Ben Harnwell.
Yeah, he is a curious example of a Catholic Archbishop, Steve, in that he would be, as a traditionalist Catholic, or even as a conservative traditionalist Catholic, he is the sort of person that I would most want to put in front of some of our evangelical followers on the show, because I think he represents the best of what the Catholic Church is about. Sadly, however, in reading the comments that are posted, at least to my own Getter feed, it's a case of, at times, the barrage of anti-Catholic comments that come in because of what Pope Francis has said. And all I want, what I'd like to do is, that guy really doesn't represent believing Catholics or what they're about. I call him on my Getter feed the honorary, the New World Order honorary chaplain. I very rarely refer to Francis as Pope because that is really what he is. He is the New World Order honorary chaplain, and everything that he's doing is pushing along that agenda, the World Economic Forum agenda, the and so on, the UN. The UN, especially on climate change, on sustainable development, everything that the Pope Francis is doing is coming from the world. And of course, as a Catholic commentator on Getter, people say, "Come on, this is your guy." Clearly there's a whiff of Satan about this. Isn't just the whole thing about the Catholic Church? Isn't it all the devil's work? And it's Steve. It's difficult to be able to get us, probably not the forum for this, but it's difficult to say, well, hang on. I understand why Protestants think this, because they've been saying this for 500 years, going back to Luther. But it's really not what the Catholic Church is about. And I think Archbishop Vigano is a far more credible presentation to our even evangelical brethren
Yes.
of explaining what it is that the Catholic Church is trying to do on the world stage.
Just right, I'm going to turn it back over to you, roll with it. Just for our audience, when they hear phrases like silent coup, because there's bombshell after bombshell after bombshell, you have to read, as Ben said, you have to read the whole thing. It'll take you 20 or 30 minutes, but carve out some time in your weekend read, doing your homework at the War Room. Make sure you carve out to do this and think about it as you read. We're picking the highlight reel, but when you see these bombshells, this is not just some fire breather bomb thrower that's a marginal figure. This is a central figure, and he is known as a serious person in understanding the world. Ben Harnwell, take it back over.
Absolutely right. Well, if Denver would very kindly put up my second segment now, my second extract. I'm just going to go to the very end of this, which is where this picks up from what I was saying on the morning show here now. And the end of this paragraph, it says the main cause of this very serious problem is found in the corruption of authority, along with the resigned obedience of those who are governed. And I just want to hang a hook onto that last paragraph, because even though we can blame, quite rightly, the globalist overlords, our globalist elites for all the damage and harm they're doing on the world stage, we, the people, must accept a certain, obviously not predominantly viewers of the War Room, but we have friends and neighbours and family who don't follow us on the War Room. And I make a quick insertion here. Please, by the way, pass on to them what we're doing here, because here's what Vigano says at the end. There's a resigned obedience of those who are governed that lets the government and our overlords get away with all the evil that they're doing. And I think that's a very fair apportionment of responsibility there. So now to the next part. Right, this is interesting because he actually talks about the crisis in the Catholic Church. And this is important because there is a spiritual dimension to what is going on now, isn't there? And this is what he says. He says, the Catholic Church also, beginning with the revolution of the Second Vatican Council, and above all, during the last 9 years of the Bergoglian pontificate, which he puts in quotation marks, has experienced the same cognitive dissonance. The faithful and the clergy have resigned themselves to obeying mere cynical officials who are no less corrupt and perverted than their counterparts in the deep state. Although it, and then he goes on to take that point forward. Again, this isn't just like Steve. We're not just two Catholics here making special pleading for the Catholic Church here with our evangelical brethren. But the point has to be made, and Archbishop Vigano is making it, that what folks see as being presented as the Catholic Church really isn't the Catholic Church. It's an imitation of it. And we know who's responsible for this.
Hang on for 1 second. I want to, so the non-Catholic audience, that a phrase he just used there, or the build up to that, when he talks about what we call the administrative state, he's like General Flynn, he calls it the deep state. He goes after them. I mean, he says they're perverts. I mean, he goes after them morally. Not, sometimes we go after them, hey, they have evil designs on democracy. They have evil designs of putting down the deplorables, evil designs across it. He just says, hey, they're a collection of perverts. I mean, he goes at the administrative state for their moral shortcomings and exactly what they're trying to do to exert more control over your life and your family's life. He takes the torch right to him, doesn't he, Ben? Yep.
Yes, he does. And his language is extremely clear and unambiguous in this letter. And some of his expressions are almost Flynnesque in that regard. Let me come on to this point now. This is continuing the data points of his narrative, because at this point now, this is the bottom of page 5. He indicates that the institutions that are supposed to represent us are now fully subservient to the overlords. And this is the quote now that I will read that makes that point. And in certain countries, such as Italy, this is taking place in a situation of disturbing complicity by all the powers of the state, both in legitimizing the violation of fundamental rights under the anti-COVID regulations, as well as in ratifying participation in a conflict, even though there was never any deliberation about entering it by the Italian parliament. Here he's talking about Ukraine and Russia, and which even the President of the Republic, the guarantor of the Constitution, approves and encourages to the applause of European technocrats. And this is as I was saying, another key theme of Vigano's thinking, which is the subversion of the norms that are supposed to represent us, to in fact representing the globalist elites. Okay, so, and here is the point I think we're going to get the two streams merging together now with regards to COVID and Ukraine, which he indicates are synthetic crises manufactured by the overlords solely to provide cover for their power grab. And here's how he puts that. Bergoglio, who's that's the surname of the Pope, of the Pope Francis. Bergoglio has also admitted it. A head of state revealed to him months before Putin's military operation in Ukraine that NATO and the European Union are deliberately provoking the Russian Federation after having ignored for years the ethnic cleansing carried out by Kiev against the Russian-speaking minority in Donbass and the Crimea. The purpose of this provocation was to spark a conflict that would provide a cover to legitimize imposing sanctions against the Russian Federation and force Western nations to undertake the green transmission. Now, that end point there is something that Vigano develops further on, and I will go into that when we get that, because he makes the point really that not everything to do with the sanctions is as it seems. Well, if you, so let me see where I am now on my highlighted text. Excuse me. Okay. Here, Archbishop Vigano has two examples to back up the thesis that I've been expounding. The existential crisis of uncontrolled immigration from the third world is by design. Here's what Archbishop Vigano has to say, because there's a very strong parallel. It's the same thing going on in Europe, the continental Europe, as it is in the United States. The most obvious example is discovering that Richard Kalergi, one of the founding fathers of the European Union, wanted to pursue social engineering policies aimed at modifying European national societies through immigration and crossbreeding, driving migration waves with the attractiveness of cheaper labor costs. Seeing the wicked obstinacy with which the waves of illegal immigrants continue to be welcomed, even when the impact that this phenomenon has on the safety of cities and on the general crime rate and the identity of national populations is obvious, demonstrates that the initial plan has been realized for the most part and that action must be taken to prevent it from being completed. Now, that is 100% diametrically opposite from the message coming out of the Vatican, that and Pope Francis directly, that there is a human right to migrate to other countries, and this is a full frontal opposition to both the Vatican and the United Nations, and I think that's a very courageous position for the Archbishop to take. Now, what I mentioned before, here is towards the end now of the interview. Archbishop Vigano wheels the interview round and brings it closer to the United States context. And here is part of the Archbishop's narrative that really, and I summarize it like this: it's not incompetence, it's by design. Americans, he says, are well aware that the price of gasoline has risen well before the Russian-Ukrainian crisis and further increased due to sanctions, real or alleged, of the international community against the Russian Federation. Today we know that sanctions, as was foreseeable, have not affected Putin in the least, but the motive behind them is, and this is what I was mentioning 5 minutes or so ago, the motive behind them is that they were supposed to strike Western nations, and in particular the nations of Europe, in order to provoke an economic and energy crisis by means of which to legitimize the ecological transition, rations, population control, and the censorship of information. So I think what the Archbishop Vigano has done here is absolutely astounding, because he's gone further from what we've been saying on the War Room for the last 3 or 4 months, that the sanctions are not going to do what they claim to do in the West, which is weaken President Putin's economic position to fund the war. What Vigano is saying is beyond that. They knew this in the West when they imposed the sanctions, because crippling the economic capacity of the West was the actual objective of the sanctions. It has nothing to do with weakening Putin. And I think this gives an illustration of the originality of Archbishop Vigano's thought here. He goes on now to say that Putin did not take the bait offered him by the provocations of the deep state, limiting himself to intervening only as necessary to give security and protection to Russian-speaking Donbass. And he stormed the Azovstal steel plant, which hid one of the secret American biolabs that produced bacteriological weapons and carried out experiments with SARS-CoV-2. And here, this is going to be music. This is that directly follows on to this. This will be music to so many of the War Room posse, because Vigano is not the sort of guy to take prisoners. This is what he says. On the other hand, the Biden family had every interest in having a war in Ukraine in order to cover up the corruption cases involving Hunter Biden and to distract people from the impending scandals looming over Obama and Hillary Clinton for Russiagate and over the deep state for the electoral fraud carried out against Donald Trump. And here... Pretty.
Yeah, go ahead. That's those statements right there. The last couple of items are it's stunning in the clarity of it. Continue on, Ben. I don't want to break your momentum.
Thanks, Steve. I'm now coming to the conclusion of the interview. This is where the Archbishop ties his themes together. He says, the eventual return of Donald Trump to the White House would allow for real peace negotiations once the deep state has been eradicated from the administration and government agencies. But the reconstruction will certainly require the collaboration and sacrifices of everyone, and a solid spiritual vision that inspires the reconstruction of the social fabric. If all of this has happened through the demonstrated electoral fraud of the last presidential election, Trump's victory would be even more striking and would have strong repercussions on the ramifications of the deep state in Europe and in particular in Italy. And here, I think, is the importance, as I go now to the closing extracts of Archbishop Vigano to MAGA and his importance as a Catholic Archbishop in good standing. He takes a radically opposite position from the Vatican, but he's a Catholic Archbishop in good standing, and he is talking on these issues here, Steve, that you have been bringing so much attention to on the War Room over the last 2 years. And he goes on to say, the failure of the effort to blame Trump for the farce of the assault on the Capitol ought to dissuade its organizers, among whom we cannot fail to number Nancy Pelosi, from trying to replicate the scene next fall, which would fall into the grotesque, in addition to being a case of deja vu. And now he talks about the Great Reset, which he says is ontologically destined for failure because it is inspired by inhuman and diabolical principles. And with that, Steve, I would like to mention what I think is the scriptural verse behind Archbishop Vigano's thinking. And it's, I don't know if you remember this, but when you had me on when I was still at Trizolti to speak about one of Archbishop Vigano's earlier letters, I cited the same text. This was about a year and a half ago. It's Ephesians 6:12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And I think it's absolutely clear from the excerpts I've chosen of this interview how that scriptural verse is absolutely key to Archbishop Vigano's pastoral approach to the worldwide economic nationalist movement.
Ben, this thing has been amazing. It's been an amazing hour. What I want to know is that it's up everywhere. We're going to push it hard. It's going to be on Getter, but I need you also. We'll talk about you doing these polls and getting them up on Getter. Ben Harnwell, real quickly, how do people track you on social media?
Thank you, Steve. I'm pretty much exclusively on Getter. If folk want to find more of my analysis on this, and I just make a quick mention as well for my Sunday reflection, which is an analysis on the scriptural verse of Sunday. Please go to search me. It's simply my surname, Harnwell, at Harnwell. Go for the one which is verified, not the imposter accounts. And I'm there 24/7 pushing out my analysis.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to have everybody get this letter. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, Jack Posobiec will be in the seat here. It's going to be an explosive show. I will be back on Saturday morning. We got specials on Saturday and Monday. You're not going to want to miss them. Very intense in the war room tomorrow morning. Check it out.